Good evening, and welcome to the meeting of the Plymouth Charter Commission. We're meeting here in Great Hall in the Town Hall on the 1st of November. We have a full agenda tonight with a guest speaker, and then we're going to get into the discussion of the various items that are in our charter, things that need to be fixed, ideas from other towns, and public comment will be at 8:30. So let's start the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
To the republic, which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So the first, we have four members of the commission here and one on Zoom, so that gives us the necessary quorum, and actually we now have five members. So the first item on the agenda tonight is the former select board member, John Mahoney. Welcome, John. John's going to give us some insights on town finances, which is one of his specialties when he was on the board.
Sorry, this is being used.
What?
Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and Mr. Abbott, thank you for putting me on the agenda. I just wanted to, I reached out to the chair because I just wanted to weigh in with respect to, I look across Plymouth County, I see 4 different forms of government. I look at Plymouth, Massachusetts, it's a representative form of government with a town manager. Kingston, Halifax, Duxbury, Pembroke, Hanson, et cetera, have an open town meeting with a town administrator or town manager. Obviously, in those communities, if you're a resident of the community, you're a registered voter and at least 18 years of age, you can go to town meeting floor and participate. Bridgewater has a town council, and obviously the city of Brockton has a mayor and a city council. So I look at this from a financial perspective, and the correlation I'll make is that in our private lives, we all have a credit score. We're rated by how we handle the U.S. dollar in a conservative, responsible, or a capitalist manner. In theory, we're putting money to work for ourselves. I think one of the most conservative actions that an American citizen can undertake is signing a document where they're going to commit to making 360 payments in a row over a 30-year period to purchase a home. And irrespective of the condition of the U.S. economy, whether it's in a period of expansion or recession, they commit to make that payment every 30 days. That's financial conservatism. I look at the community, irrespective of the form of government, and you don't get a credit score, but you get a bond rating. Same thing. Are you handling the U.S. dollar in a responsible, fiscally conservative, capitalist manner? So, you get an evaluation by Wall Street, bonding agencies down on Wall Street, and it's the bedrock of capitalism in American Western Hemisphere, okay? They're looking at your finances from top to bottom, and they're reviewing it, and they're giving you a report card, and that grade is a bond rating. They're looking at strong reserves, debt ratio to the operating budget, a percentage, that's all it is. They want to see it, I think, in the 5 to 7% range. Favorable debt profile. The community profile, the demographics, the management structure, and fiscal policies. So, within the context of the current form of government, you recently created a facilities maintenance fund, dedicated revenue stream for proactively and responsibly investing in the infrastructure of the community. That obviously no community in Massachusetts, no state, and the federal government doesn't responsibly handle the infrastructure that this country needs. The OPEB Trust Fund, 7 to 10 years ago, setting up the vehicle, starting to fund that mechanism to deal with the liability that the community has. The structure that you're currently in, $54 million in a 61,000 square foot building, brand new construction, done with a earmark from the local meals tax option. Okay, not allowed to get buried into the general fund and disappear instantaneously overnight. Earmarked into its own segregated interest-bearing account and paying for the debt, the note, the principal and interest of this structure over the course of a 30-year time frame. Your current form of government, the select board, I would say probably led by Mr. Malaguti. You had a catastrophic failure of a sewer line that was approximately 15 years old, obviously from 2015 to 2016. The current form of government collaborated with the state and the private sector, dealing with something that probably no community south of the city has seen on this level. And the response was instantaneous, and it delivered results for this community. There was a lawsuit, there was a settlement, the community, we had to put a new pipe in the ground, approximately $48 million. The lawsuit, there was a $22.825 million settlement. So what happened was you took the opportunity to put the pipe in the ground. The shot, it probably should have been put in the ground 20 years ago. Plastic pipe, the walls are 2.5 inches thick, and you did what you should have done also 20 years ago, is we put a redundant pipe in the ground. And of the 350 communities in Massachusetts, you're only one of 3 now that have a redundant pipe in their sewer system. Double taxation was eliminated back in FY13. You stopped artificially subsidizing out of the general fund the enterprise funds. So all 4 of those funds as of FY13 at the time, which was water, sewer, solid waste, and the airport, were self-sufficient. That means that if you didn't get town water, if you don't get town sewer, if you didn't participate in the airport, and if you didn't get a transfer station sticker, you weren't being taxed for it. If you didn't get that service, you weren't paying for it. For the first time in the community's history, you set up a responsible management stabilization fund for roads where you can proactively invest in your roads. Obviously, another example of a progressive tax being handled in a regressive manner, artificially upholding the placeholder in the general fund, predominantly of human resources, pay, pension, and health care. And at that time, you had an exposure, a liability with respect to roads of $135 million. There was a movement afoot to go to town meeting and look for $200 million to raise property taxes against that, which was completely contradictory to me, because it's hypocritical to charge the American taxpayer a tax for roads that doesn't go to roads. So your tax policy, and this is the same in every other community in Massachusetts, was similar to an Abbott and Costello routine. You have a healthy stabilization, regular stabilization rainy day fund. You also had a nuclear mitigation fund that the board started, set up approximately a decade ago. And obviously in the last decade, you've had the best audits in your history. So what happened? So under the Standard & Poor rating, there's 3 levels, and within the context of those 3 levels, you can either get a plus, a minus, or just a regular grade. So in 1998, this community had an A+ bond rating. So the ratings are, it's single A, it's double A, and it's triple A. And at each level, you can either be just a regular, you can be a negative, a plus, or just the single, double, or triple A. 2002, you got a bond upgrade. So I can't speak to what exactly the community was doing in a positive manner then. You don't want to put Mr. Malaguti on the spot, but maybe he could. You got a bond upgrade to a double A negative. You were there for 6 years. March of 2008, you got another bond upgrade. From 2008 to 2016, you were a double A. 2016, another bond upgrade. You're now a double A plus. You've been there for 5 years. And obviously the last bullet, if you look at that, you're looking at 6 to 8% of the communities in Massachusetts have been fortunate enough to ascend to the AAA bond rating. And I can name 20 of them off the top of my head. But you're looking at Boston, Weston, Cohasset, Duxbury, Hingham, Falmouth, Lexington, Weston, communities of that stature. So I talk to people all the time And I always ask them, and it's literally been hundreds of people, the perception out there is that, well, if there was a change of government, we'd have lower taxes. We'd have a more diverse tax base. All completely false narratives. So if you look at the economic development recipe, and if we wanted to make a cake or a pie, and the flavor was economic development, what are the ingredients you need? You need land, water, wastewater, roads, power, and fiscal policy. So what's in the cupboard? What do you have in the cupboard when you go to the kitchen and you want to make this recipe in the town of Plymouth, Massachusetts? You have very little to no land. 1,000 acres. So you want to talk about needing infrastructure, you're looking at a $300 to $500 million investment, including an interchange down off of 495 in the southwestern corner of the community. Another taxpayer boondoggle, always chasing the get-rich-quick schemes. That's what the community does. We're not the only community guilty of that, but that's what people look at that and they think. Wells. You want the proper risk mitigated or redundancy in your wells? Do you want the proper security in the wells? You currently have a 13-well system. As you sit here today, you need one more well to sit here and be safe. And that's just without any future development. You need one today. And I asked the department heads and the community, the powers that be, where that's going to be located, and right now they don't know. Wastewater, obviously the town sewer system only has about 3,400 community customers, plus or minus, in the historical downtown waterfront area. Roads, the auto excise tax, obviously created in the state of Massachusetts around World War II. It wasn't until it took 70 years to figure out that it needed to go to roads, its intended purpose, in a sustainable manner. In fiscal policy, Proposition 2.5. Once again, allowing you to charge the citizens of this community, anyone that owns their automobile, a tax, tell them it's for roads, and it doesn't go to roads. And then, this is the term that I use, general fund socialism, the notion that you are going to lower taxes and provide more services with all new growth going into the general fund is a complete false narrative. I wouldn't put my worst enemy's property taxes in the general fund. It's anti-American. So the question is, with a change of government, how does the community's financial situation improve? And the answer is it doesn't. The common denominator here isn't the form of government, it's failed fiscal policy. Over-reliance on a fund that is completely, to me, is contradictory to what the US dollar stands for. And the last thing I'd like to wrap up with, Mr. Abbott, is that a few years ago, you were in a prior charter commission over at PCIS, must have been 3 to 5 years ago, and the former mayor of Braintree showed up, and he basically said that the best thing that the town at the time of Braintree ever did was change government and elect him mayor. And he rattled off a list of things that the community of Braintree had done upon electing him. And he said, well, since I was elected mayor, Braintree has been able to do A, B, C, and D. But what nobody in that commission said was the town of Plymouth had already accomplished everything he said, and then some. So you already have it in your possession to make significant changes, to control the growth of taxes, to streamline services. You just got to keep building on what you've done for the last 20 years. And if there are people out there advocating for a change of government, I repeatedly asked them that I should be asking for 5 examples of how we would improve financially upon that change. I should at least get 3. I'm asking for 1. I've literally talked to hundreds of people. Nobody can give me 1 example. So that's why I wanted to talk to you, okay? We don't delve into the social issues at the local level. You leave that to them at Beacon Hill. Irrespective of the form of government at the local level, it's about property taxes, enterprise funds, fees, other taxes, determining what the services are, the infrastructure needs. How do you deliver that to the community in a proactive, responsible manner? That's it, Bill.
Thank you, Joe. Why don't you stay there for a minute? We may have some questions from the members. Dave Malaguti.
Very impressive, John. I think that era when our bond rating went down, if my memory serves me correctly, it had something to do with the final payment of the Edison settlement. Remember, 2008 was the last payment from the Edison agreement? No, the pilot was the payment in lieu of taxes. When Edison sold out, they were given time to prepare a figure that they would reimburse the town. It started out, I think, at like $5 million and went down to like $1.5 million or something like that. And I think that was the last year of that payment. I think that had something to do with it.
David, I was going to point out that all this good stuff started when they elected you to the board in '98, but I didn't want that to go to your head.
Thanks.
Betsy,
John, thank you so much. That was very helpful. Would you go back a slide and give more information on the slide before this one, please? That was pretty fast, and you said a lot of stuff at once. Could you go through, give a little bit more detail? I understand,
I think the first bullet was just created in the last 12 to 18 months since I left the board. but-
is this the one just before? No, I think there was another one that had, there was a different slide that had bond ratings and all. Okay, strong reserves. No, I guess not. No, I guess it was that one. The one that you
That
ended.
slide there that's just, I sat down with the finance director for half an hour, and that came from her as, what they're looking at when they're evaluating your grade.
So it was the slide just before your last slide, so it's so it is, yeah, that one right there. So you said something, yes, okay, so you said something like, I wouldn't want the taxpayer to depend on something, and you said it very quickly, so could you say that again, please? I'm sorry, maybe you've forgotten. You went through, it's the next slide, you went through it very, very fast, I think. But we've had the best audits in the last decade, you had said. And then you said something about taxes. I don't know, I'll have to come back. Maybe I'll watch the film and then I can ask you. But thank you, this was excellent. It's,
I left a lot on the cutting room floor, too, trust me.
okay, yeah.
There were some graphs I was going to incorporate.
I'll
but-
watch it again and I'm sure I'll understand it better. I'll watch the tape. I'm copying it. as
I'm
well.
sorry, Betsy, if you think of that, you can just call me.
I will, no, I will. No, it's just that
Bill,
you gave
go
so
ahead.
much information so quickly.
So were you
Sorry.
talking about the general fund and Betsy, were you talking about when he was going over the general fund and putting money into it and not putting his worst enemy's money? Was that the thing?
Yeah, he said something like that.
So go back over that.
If you look at the timeline of the improvement in the bond rating, and once again, it's established that you went from a single A plus to a double A minus in '98. And if look at what the community has done this century, there's a correlation there between setting aside certain reserves outside of the general fund, whether you're earmarking them for infrastructure or just having proper, reserves set aside. And not, like I said, in 2017, what happens is government, irrespective of the form, always waits for something to get to critical mass. So the political hacks, irrespective of party, can have their backside covered. And in 2016-17, there was literally a movement to raise property taxes $200 million. Because thank God there's a law in Massachusetts that says when you borrow a bond for roads, it can't be longer than 15 years. So when you bond for 15 years, you're pretty much paying back about $1.50 for every dollar you borrow. So if you had borrowed $135 million back in 17, you're going to pay $65 million in interest. And unfortunately, because government doesn't get out ahead of these things, Lynn Barrett put together that fund, and what happens is the prior 20 years, that auto excise tax had grown in the general fund on average 3% a year. So what she did was, and what town meeting approved was a $5 million investment in roads in 17 and another $5 million in 19. She's only allowing the auto excise tax to grow in the general fund at 1.25% a year, taking that delta out, which in theory should be 1.75%, and paying back the $5 million. And you saw what JB did with the first $5 million allotment. He took 102,000 linear feet of road, which is 19 to 21 miles of road, and brought all of that up to an 80% level of safety. He did it again in 19. I don't have the statistics. I don't know if it was the same mileage of road. And then what happens? The pandemic hits. So now you can truly cut back prior to that, you talk to people and say, hey, we got to cut back. How do you cut back on nothing? And if you're not going to do anything for roads, why are you allowed to collect that tax? And that's for all 350 communities. That's the hypocrisy of finance and government. It's befuddling to me. So, which is 21. So I talked to Lynn. They took a break for a year. It looks like JB's going to come back in April of 22, and ask for town meeting for another $5 million. But now what you've done is you've established that this works. And you're proactively investing in roads, and you're doing it without layering $200 million across 65,000 people and businesses.
Yeah, just.
My second question is, John, do you have suggestions either tonight, or could you email us any suggestions you have to improve the charter that we have now?
Sure.
Us tonight, or do you want to email them to us?
I'll email them. I got to think about that one.
Okay, thank
Okay,
you.
so I had a question before. John, can you go back over, you had 4 points. You said the town of Plymouth focus is on social issues, that's for Beacon Hill, but then you went over the 4 main priorities of a community: property taxes, enterprise funds. You went over these 4 things. You went over them pretty quickly. Could you go back over those again that you saw as the responsibilities of a municipality should be focused on these money-oriented accounts? Do you know what,
Well,
do you know what I'm talking about?
I think I made a general statement at the end, kind of maybe summarizing. I don't remember the exact 4 that I referenced, but
Towards the end, it was about property
This-
taxes, enterprise funds.
I was maybe speaking off the cuff. There's only 6 slides there, so
It was towards the end.
that's the end right there.
Okay.
I just,
Second one.
here you go. And another example, the 4 enterprise funds. The sewer fund had a general fund subsidy combined, I think, of $6.5 million over the course of a decade, I think from fiscal year 3 to 12. And then, so the board made a determination, was that fair to individuals who didn't get town sewer if their septic system failed? Government wasn't going to be there to help them, so we weaned ourselves off of that. And then, of course, at the time, did you really need a general fund subsidy for a water account that had 14,000 customers in it? And there had been a Boston Globe review of the top 10 most inexpensive water systems in Massachusetts, and Plymouth was one of them. So why did those 14,000 people, myself included, need a general fund subsidy? And it's those people who have their own private wells who are subsidizing. So that's it. But it's all about delivering services, and how are you doing that in the most cost-effective manner? And then the other thing is, like, irrespective of the form of government, nobody can think beyond tomorrow. I mean, you've got to start thinking 10, 20, 30 years out. And this building, I've said this numerous times, this building is a miracle. This building is a miracle because that meals tax option was collected for FY 15, 16, 17, and 18 before Lynn went out to bond for 30 years. And that note is for from 2018 to 2047, where you collected a tax and then didn't take a flamethrower to the money. It actually went into its own little account, started generating interest, nobody was able to touch it. And then in year 4, you bonded it out for 30 years, and how are you paying for it? Right there. And you've got to strike that balance moving forward between, yeah, I get it, you got to feed the general fund, but you can't if you're putting all new revenue into the general fund, you're not changing anything.
Can I ask
Just to follow up on Betsy's thing, in your time on the Board of Selectmen, how did they play a role in that in relationship to the responsibilities of town meeting? So when you go over the strengths that you're seeing, how did your board accomplish that? Obviously, it wasn't on its own. We have a strong finance department. You had town meeting. How was this accomplished?
Who are you electing? Who are you hiring? What are your fiscal policies? Okay, it all comes together. And listen, I don't want to give Certainly, you have a finance director here that's as good as they come in the Commonwealth, okay? And I think she got hired shortly before I was fortunate enough to get elected. She got hired somewhere in '08, '09. Well, you got a solid finance director. You know, obviously, I served on the board for 12 years with a variety of different individuals with different, you know, philosophies. But I found that when you took something to town meeting, and town meeting said, why is this good for the community? If you were able to say, this is right for the town of Plymouth because of A, B, C, and D, 99 out of 100 times, it was passing. And when you couldn't answer those questions, then you were in trouble with an article. But it's, you put together, I think in 2019, you finally established your fiscal processes and philosophies. I think they're on the town website. You're audited every year. The audits in the last decade have been glowing. I can remember being on FinCom, I think in '07, where, I'm sorry, Miss Barrett had come on, and between 7 and 9, whenever she got hired, and there was one announcement where she had found $200,000 somewhere in an account. So that doesn't happen anymore. So,
Thank-
Other questions? Wrestling.
Yeah, John, great numbers. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. One of the themes that you were talking about is that you need to be forward-thinking, no matter what form of government you have, irregardless of what form of government. And there's a couple examples you gave where, you know, you were kind of saying that we weren't forward-thinking. How do you think that we could better use our government, whether it's what we have or what we can get? You know, what is the role of government in forward thinking? How do you think we could do better at that? I think that that's something that we really don't do well, and I'd love to know how you think we could do that better. You know, it's you know, all great to talk about economic development and where we need it, and you know, how we get great bond rating, but I really think that we need to look forward, and we're not.
right. So I guess part of my position is that when I ask people, you know, can you give me an example of how that we improve our finances if we change government? So a textbook example that we've already gone over was the, you know, the auto excise tax. Okay? So in those 350 other communities, whether they're a city, mayor, city council, town manager, or just an open town meeting, that money is in the general fund, just propping up artificially, predominantly human resources, the fiscal package that they get. Right. Exactly. So that's a difficult question. The problem is, it's just, it's a different arena. Some people have different motivations, if you will. And it's tough to break any form of government out of the cycle. And it's almost as if you go into a town meeting, you survive, you wipe your brow, and take a breath for 11 months. And then you're like, how are we going to do this again? And all I can tell you is, if you had, the single greatest thing you could probably do to prevent taxes from going up and to provide people with services is to create a sufficiently funded infrastructure fund. So you started that with this. I don't know how to answer that question, Wrestling. All forms of government have that problem. You're always thinking in the 1-year time frame, and I don't know how to get out of that. All I can tell you is, I sat with your wife, and one of the best things the community ever did, you're currently in, and, you know, she helped break the mold. But you've got to keep building on that.
Betsy?
Yes, John, thank you. All your comments have been so helpful. Would you speak to the role of the Advisory and Finance Committee? You've been on the Finance Committee, you've been a selectman. One of the things we're going to be discussing is what should the role of the Finance Committee be? How is the Finance Committee performing now? Should maybe the Finance Committee become just finance and not look at things, you know, like the NIP bottle bill, you know, those kinds of things? So could you speak to your experience on the Finance Committee? And one of the things that people have criticized the Finance Committee is they sort of rubber stamp the selectmen. I'm not saying they do, but that I've heard people say that. So how can we have a really effective Finance Committee that brings us the information in town meeting and to the residents of Plymouth that we need to make the decisions that town meeting has to make?
So Betsy, when you say information, what do you mean by that?
Well, the Finance Committee, I have not seen them, I've been disappointed, actually, that I have not seen requests for decreases in staff, for example, or, so there's add, taxes go up, and when I'm sitting as a town meeting member, I'm not hearing from the Finance Committee of what we could do without, or how we could cut, or the increase. Maybe we have to increase, but maybe we can reduce that increase. And so I would like to have a Finance Committee that maybe delves a little deeper into department by department. What do departments actually need for staff, for example? Because I think that human resources, of course, is one of our biggest expenses. And when we hire a new person, and people have heard me say this before, but I'm going to ask them to let me say it again, that when we hire a new person, we're hiring them maybe for 60 years of benefits and pensions, et cetera. So we're indebting people 60 years from now. Now, I happen to be a town employee, so I'm not against, and I'm a union member, you know, I'm a union member, so I'm not against unions, and I'm not against town employees, but when we hire someone new, we don't eliminate any positions, so we now have more pensions, more benefits, more salaries, and I don't see that decreasing in any way. So as a former member of the Finance Committee, I don't know what role you play, I think different subcommittees and so forth happen in the Finance Committee, but how can we have a Finance Committee that brings to town meeting some decreases as well as going along with whatever the selectmen are asking?
I don't know how you, so I think in the question you had two different things. I think there was a philosophical thing and then an information. All I can tell you is, I think I served in FinCom for a couple of years, and what I saw was a pretty thorough vetting of the budget, and I know that, I think it was a 15-member committee, and they were broken out into subgroups at the time, and I believe that I was on public safety, so I got to meet with, it wasn't Ed Bradley at the time, was it, David? I can't remember, but certainly. Pearson, maybe Pearson. 07? Okay, so, I had the opportunity to meet with the fire chief and the police chief and the captains and go over those individual budgets from top to bottom. And then other colleagues on that committee were meeting with, finance and library and recreation and things like that. So I think there was a proper vetting there. And certainly in 21st century, this world, there's plenty of information out there. So there's a perception out there that town meeting might, rubber stamp certain things. But the volume of information out there that is disseminated ahead of time, it's just, I grew up in an open town meeting community. I started going to town meeting at the age of 18. There was a cage up on the stage that the town moderator would roll and take a ping pong ball out with a number on it for an article. And town meeting would go on for 4 or 5 nights, and everything was debated on the floor then. And that's what you have in the information age, is just, you've had that sea change in one direction, where, you know, people, and then, you know, the internet and social media, and you're seeing what these things are doing. But philosophically, I don't know what you can do. I don't know what you can do to change the FinCom to do what you're asking them to do.
I'm sorry, and I don't mean at all to say that the FinCom doesn't work really, really hard. I'm not insulting any FinCom member. And it's an overall disappointment that I have with the budget, that we are not reducing and decreasing the way that our taxes are increasing. I think that we need to not continue to increase taxes every single time town meeting meets. However, this combination of Selectmen Finance Committee, perhaps there's a way that in the charter, we can make less onerous for the Advisory and Finance Committee by reducing it strictly to a Finance Committee.
I'll leave that discussion up to you.
Because Betsy, that's a very interesting point. I just think that when we talk about this budget process, that you say at town meeting, you're confronted by these costs going up and up and up. I think we have to understand that right now, the Finance Department, the Finance Committee is beginning a process of meeting with department heads, coming up with a budget. They start working 6 months out. And that's my argument, that in the future, whatever form of government we have, whoever's voting on that budget needs to be part of the budget process, so that you can make those accommodations that we don't need this, or we do need that, or they build a rationale of why they need this. So it's a very good point that you made with John on the frustration that you feel as a town meeting member, but I think that might be modified if you were part of the budget process.
David?
Well, I have to stick my 2 cents worth in. I served on the Finance Committee for 3 years, from 76 to 79. 2 years I was chairman. In 79, when I was chairman, the budget was $33 million. Now, factor in inflation. Today, the Dow hit 36,000 briefly, okay? I think it settled at 35.8 or something like that. So the dollars need to be adjusted for inflation before you talk about anything else. But there is that thorough vetting process that John went through when he was on the Finance Committee, and when I went on the Finance Committee, that process was in effect then too. But let's just take the past few years. You think taxes should go down. I will say to you this, they won't go down. Because just in the past few years, drive up Summer Street and look to your right once you get past Westerly Road, and there's that big development in there, all of those houses. Go up to Colony Place. There's all of those big houses in there. They all demand services. Okay, they're paying property taxes, but they all need police, and they need fire, and they need other things. And that constantly increases the budget. If you think the taxes are going to go down, you're seriously deluding yourselves. Now, I don't mean to say they have to go up exponentially. I understand that. But they will go up. You have to accept that. And I don't know what that percentage would be. I'm not that astute on municipal finance that I can tell you they should go up 3% a year, 2% a year, 5% a year, 7% a year. But they will be going up because there's a constant demand on services.
John?
I don't know how you change the fiscal approach, Betsy. All I can tell you is that the general fund, again, is no good. In 2017, I had a discussion, and I'll leave you with this, with the former superintendent of schools, Mr. Maestas. And I asked him, I said, what can you do, hypothetically, again, hypothetically, if the meals tax was doubled? And that was doubled. He told me that every 6 years, you could pay cash and replace all 8 elementary schools over a 48-year time frame. So he told me, and I said, what does a solid elementary school go for in 2017 now? That's all blown out of the water. But at the time, he told me it was $40 million. And he said, the state will come in with 50%. You're on the hook for $20 million. The problem is, when you bond that over 30 years, it becomes $40 million again. because now you're paying back on 30 years, you're paying back $2 for every dollar. So over the course of, if you replicated that in your traditional fiscal approach, which is borrowing against the general fund, you're replacing all 8 elementary schools every 6 years by raising taxes over a 30-year time frame, $40 million apiece, which over a 48-year time frame with inflation is in the $1 billion neighborhood. Under his scenario, if the meals tax was doubled, and you can't do that, obviously without the state's permission, and we've already earmarked one of it towards this, but under that scenario, the key being, it's in its segregated own interest-bearing account, you're paying cash every 6 years for a new elementary school, your cost is only $8 million, because you're being told by the professionals in the community that 60% of the meals tax is coming from people that don't live in Plymouth. So 60% of 20 is 12. 12 million from the visitors from the community, we're all, who live here, are on the hook for 8. So you could, under the doubling of the meals tax, you're replacing all 8 elementary schools over a 48-year time frame for your cost is $64 million. 0 increase in property taxes. Now, if you doubled the meals tax and it goes into the general fund, your cost goes back to $40 million. So you either understand how the US dollar works or you don't. And I can tell you, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what form of government you have. And the key is you got to take your opportunities, and it's almost like you're advising somebody in their 20s, 30s, or 40s that if they have nothing set aside for retirement, your advice to them is to start saving. It's the same thing. I mean, this community is 401 years old. Unless something happens, it's going to get to 501 and 601. So you're going to start doing things differently. And this building here, people think 54 million. That's nothing. If you look at the next 40 years, you probably need baseline infrastructure anywhere from 2 to 4 billion. Okay? The more you segregate it aside and put into one account, and in my opinion, this was the beginning account. This is an infrastructure account. You keep making deposits in that, and then you insulate the property taxpayers, the residents and the businesses, from continued property tax increases. And then, David, you're absolutely right. The commercial is going residential. And the Independence Mall is becoming a little town. The Hanover Mall is becoming a town. Commerce Way, Home Depot, 700 units under quote-unquote 40B. So
So I recognize Frank Mann. Frank?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in, John. It's been very informative. One of the things I think that we need to deal with as a reality is the general appearance or apprehension on the part of the public that we have an aged, antiquated form of government. From my perspective, in many years in town as a newspaper reporter, I had insights into the operations, and in general, I was impressed with the professionalism. Specifically, I bring up what was potentially one of the more darker moments in the town's economic history that was turned
Frank, I
into...
think we lost your volume. Turn it up.
Oh. Okay. Is that any better?
Yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry about that. I got a bit of a cold, so I think my voice is hoarse as well. Well, let me get to the point that as a reporter in town for many years, I have a kind of a counterintuitive sense of the government and the staff as being very professional on many levels. And what was one of our potentially most darkest economic moments in town was the sewer debacle. I call it a debacle because clearly it was, the main sewer system breaking open in the community and effluent flowing out into the streets. That should have been potentially a fatal blow to many people's political careers and the economic vitality of the town. But in fact, the town showed an amazing amount of nimbleness, an amazing amount of ability, as you mentioned, I think, in your presentation, to work with various, private, state, and other groups. And we ended up coming out of that with, I would say, very little negative effect in a brand new sewer system. And it's that kind of a nimbleness that we need to have throughout the government. So I wonder if you had any insights into what made that moment that could have been so dark and was difficult for several years, but still ended up being a kind of a success despite itself.
Frank, I didn't know I was getting all the hard questions tonight. All I can tell you is that, I don't know if, the community was in a corner. They didn't have a choice but to react appropriately and circle the wagons, but they did. Obviously, we have some pretty talented department heads. David Malaguti was on the select board at the time. He has a background in some, this, machinery and what has to be done in building these things. And, geez, Frank, now that I think about it, I think there's a photo there that was in the old colony. Aren't you overlooking a table with Mr. Malaguti and Mr. Tavares?
Yeah.
I think you're there. I could be wrong, but, the town, you had your department heads, got together with the select board. Obviously, Mr. Tavares called, numerous executive sessions. How are we tackling this? We get lucky in a couple of respects. I think one of the breaks occurred on a sunny Sunday afternoon. It ended up going down, I think, Westerly Road into a drainage ditch. There was some fortuitous variables that occurred there. But I can tell you this, Frank, that, we put some funding into legal. We filed a lawsuit. They couldn't settle quick enough. There was like I said earlier, there was almost a $23 million settlement. So you have the infrastructure in the ground that you're probably paying 55 cents on the dollar for. And I don't know what the final numbers were, because with COVID-19, one of those payments was delayed for a year, which allowed us to generate another almost $600,000 to $700,000 in interest before we made that payment. So I don't know how that shook down, but at the end of the day, that differential of $24 to $26 million was borne by the 3,400 plus or minus users of the sewer enterprise fund, and nobody else had any fee increases to their taxes whatsoever. And I will tell you this, Frank, that from what I'm told, there will be a case study done down the road on how government teams up with the private sector and tackles an issue such as this, because the performance was excellent by all involved. And I'm giving that to my other fellow select board members. I just followed on that one. But, Mr. Gould, Mr. Peter, Mr. Riggi, other select board members, obviously town meeting saw what was going on. They appropriated the appropriate funds. And, God willing, Mr. Peter is right. Now you have the infrastructure in the ground that would properly maintained will last you 50 years.
Scott?
I just, excuse me, when you were talking about the meals tax, it kind of brought something to mind that there are places down in out west that actually fund their entire public safety off of meals tax. Not that I'm a fan of any kind of new tax, but like I said, when it comes to offsetting fixed costs, has been one of the things that I've spoken on for years. And that was, just kind of when you were talking about what could you do with a doubled meals tax. Like I said, the fact that some places do fund their entire public safety with that every year. I just wanted to make that comment.
No, I appreciate that, Scott, and I mean, I could go on and on this one, but I think the community missed, there was a missed opportunity. I don't know if it's probably too late, but you had a new industry. It's doing very well in the community, the marijuana industry, so, some of that should have been allowed. One or two of those facilities should have been segregated off and earmarked for, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's a fire station, it's a school, or funding a department, but there has to be some sort of balance, going forward.
John, part of the exercise this commission's been doing is reading charters from towns all over the state, and it's interesting how much emphasis they put on the finance committee. And you've had some experience on it. I'm wondering, the way the current finance committee operates, do you think they get involved soon enough in the process, or are they just there when everything has already been decided and they just put a stamp on it before it comes to town meeting. This has been a concern, I know, of several other towns that we've been researching. They want their finance committees to be involved early on when the budget is being developed, not wait until the budget is all done and then present it to them for comment.
Yeah, I've been out of the loop on a lot of things, Mr. Abbott, in the last year, but I didn't know that, are you saying that that's the case? But I'm more of a, get them involved as early as possible.
Right.
But when you were on the FinCom, there were subcommittees that started meeting 6 months out.
And are you telling me they don't exist anymore?
Yeah, so, I mean, no, they're there. I think that it's important to note that the FinCom does an enormous amount of work, and it starts 6 months out on the annual budget. They're meeting in their subcommittees, they're meeting with different department heads, they build a budget. So I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that our FinCom isn't doing its due diligence, it is. But things are being lost in the translation about, do we really need to do that? Do we need that hire? Do we need that piece of equipment? I think that if town meeting members were involved in the discussion early on, it'd be a more lively debate on that question.
John, we hope you come back and give us some comments on the form of government generally, and also on the select board. I have one question before you leave on the select board, since I definitely want to hear what you have to say about the current role of the select board in Plymouth in terms of what it spends its time doing. How do you feel it operates in terms of setting long-term policy? Do you think they spend too much time doing day-to-day stuff? I mean, what's your overall opinion of its operation?
I've had a lot going on in my life outside of Plymouth politics in the last year, so I really don't. I left the board, I watched the next meeting where I was appointed as a member of the NDCAP, the State Advisory Committee for the Power Plant Decommissioning to the governor. I haven't watched a meeting in almost 18 months, so I don't know specifically what you're referring to, but the executive board is a direction policy board. And I would say it's more of a Google Earth, a larger view of, what direction do we want to go in. And so I don't know what we're referring to here, but,
Well, some towns have even gone to great lengths in spelling out exactly what the select board cannot do and should not do.
okay.
So I just wondered whether you had an opinion when you were a selectman.
I think I had a
Well,
pretty,
I mean, I can say, John, I was once a selectman in a prior life, and I thought the tedium of trying to deal with stray dogs and everything from trash removal, everything like that was a total waste of the select board. And they should be involved in policy setting, long-term vision, the future.
yep, yeah, I completely agree. But there will be instances where certainly, the citizens will reach out to various select board members if they have an issue on something different. I think that might be dependent on several variables. I think at the most of the time, maybe the lightning rod is whoever might be chair at the time. They might be approached, especially if the individual in question, the citizen, doesn't know any of the five in a personal manner. Then if they know one of the five, they'll reach out to that person. And then, obviously in today's world, Bill, it's a completely different animal with social media, where you can get requests from anybody, at any time. But, my experience on the board was, the thing that jumps to mind now is, Newfield Street and tree removal and potential tree removal. But those, the oak trees over on Newfield Street were a terrific traffic mitigation. And, you had to get involved, with the DPW director and the town manager. And, certain neighborhoods come out and they advocate for different things. But I didn't get bogged down. I didn't get bogged down in the minutia of the day-to-day operations because I work during the day. I'm not home to Plymouth until 3 to 4 in the afternoon. So, I thought if you have a quality department head and they know what they're doing, kind of let them go do their thing.
So I just wanted to follow up one question, John, on the role. I guess the question I have is if, looking back, you were on the board for 10 years.
12.
Looking back over
12.
10, what was that?
12.
12, 12 years. Looking back, the question I think I really want to hear is, what do you see that could be improved? I mean, what could be improved? Where did you feel as if the board was stymied by something? That the select board could not act effectively to meet a challenge? Is there a situation that you saw that kept revisiting, reoccurring, that should be changed? Where did you see the Board of Selectmen in terms of the structure of their institute? How did it function? Was there something there that was making it difficult for you to do your job at times? Where did you see the need for improvement?
I would have to think about that one, Bill. So does it,
There's always room for improvement. Where did you see it?
well, I mean, but am I getting stymied because philosophically, I just had 3 other members, colleagues, that disagreed with the position I had? So, but, I mean, in that case, it might be democracy.
I guess
So
not
3
that.
individual.
Not the opinion of your other board members. That's why we have 5, to have different opinions. But the functionality of the Board of Selectmen, how they interacted with the town manager, department heads, how did it function? Did you see a circumstance where it could be better? Is there something that, in your 12 years' experience implementing the responsibilities of the Board of Selectmen, did you see something that could be improved to make the job separate from politics, but actually the execution of your responsibilities? Was there something there that could be done better?
I'll take that one under advice. I got to think about that one.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I just have one
Just
more.
David.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I got an answer. I served with John. I served with, I think, 18 or 19 or 20 different selectmen. And we all functioned, I think, fairly well. There were some pluses and there were some minuses. And I think the system is set up so that it functions pretty well, as long as you have competent department heads and a competent town manager. Now, it's very clearly delineated in our current charter that management is to take care of the day-to-day issues and the selectmen are to set policy. That is a vast improvement over the time from 1981 to 1990, which was my first 9 years of tenure. Back then, we had dog hearings. Man, there is nothing more boring than sitting there listening to a dog hearing. But we had to do it because that's how it was. All of those minutiaes that John is referring to and Bill has mentioned, those were given to the town manager and they were delegated to the various department heads, for example, that type of thing. So we had a good situation, we had a good setup. And yes, you're always going to get comments from your constituents, especially the ones who know you on a first-name basis. And when you grew up in North Plymouth 73 years ago, you can imagine how many North Plymouth constituents know me on a first-name basis. So yes, you listen. But you should not get into the day-to-day operation of the department heads. You should leave that to the town manager because that's what you hired that person for. And every time you take away that person's role by interfering, yeah, you might get that one issue done. You know, I call up and I say, you know what, I want this done. Okay, so that's fine. That takes care of my issue. But now other issues are being pushed to the side because that department head has to deal with your issue. So the selectmen need to stay out of the day-to-day operation of the department heads. That's how it was designed to run. That's what our charter says, and that's what we should be adhering to, and we're not.
Larry.
Well, it looks like we've swiveled a little bit to the role of the Select Board, and I don't expect an answer for this one, but the board hires and fires the town manager. That's the nuclear option. In between hiring and firing, they also are responsible to a degree for supervising the town manager. And One of the tasks I've assigned myself, and I would hope that you might help, is coming up with some wording advising the select board from the charter of how they should supervise the town manager. And I well understand that you don't want to supervise the town manager by saying on Tuesday you should spend 37 cents on candy bars. But if you have some wording that down the road you can think of, I'd appreciate it if you could forward it. Thank you, John.
Yeah, Betsy.
Yes, I wanted to address the master plan. Our master plan is quite old now. I think it was 2004, I'm not sure. But how do you see the master plan helping with this long-term view? We have a master plan, and I remember when I was on the Open Space Committee and when I was chairman, I would refer back to the master plan, but I'm not sure how often the master plan actually informs the decision of the town meeting or selectmen. Although it should, and a huge amount of work goes into it, I'm not sure it isn't somewhat put on a shelf after it's finished.
Bill, I thought you were going to cut me off after an hour. So, Betsy, yeah, so what happens is, I think you get these opportunities, you're going down the road and you come to the proverbial fork in the road with respect to certain issues, whether it's a tax, the opportunity to pick up a piece of land, are you adding X amount of human resources? And what I see, irrespective of the form of government, again, is that you have to make this instantaneous decision, and you're making it on the fly. It's in the moment, and any master plan that had been put together and is out there sitting on the shelf is not referenced, and people, for various reasons, whether the economy is in a recession and it's a bad time to do that at this point in time, or there's been a pandemic, or for various other reasons, you just, I don't know if it's a part of our culture, especially when we get into this arena, but the master plan is a long-term document, but government doesn't think long-term, and I don't know how to solve that puzzle. I really don't.
John, thank you. We may invite you to come in if you have some more ideas. Be sure to tell us, and as they evolve, and come on in again.
Yeah, and Larry, I'll try to follow up with you. I don't know if I have your
Right.
cell phone number, but I'll touch base. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item in our agenda is continuing what we started at our last meeting. This is a second session devoted to specifics, things in the charter, possible inclusion in a new charter or a current charter. Some of them, regardless of the form of government, some of them are pertaining to a particular current form of government. But any of that, we want to get some ideas out on the table and start discussing these specific points. We're keeping careful notes. This is the second of a meeting that's devoted to the specifics. And I made a list here. And the first one I'd like to kick around is the number of town meeting members. Several of us have spoken about that from time to time, but let's have some discussion about it. You saw how other charters handle this. There's at least two charters, and I ran into one yesterday, where they actually set the number of town meeting members, and it's permanent, and then they regulate the number of town meeting members per precinct as the town is growing and precincts are added, but the overall number stays the same. And I think Milton does that, Shrewsbury does that, and there are a number of towns that have that approach. And I know there's been talk about Plymouth town meeting, and the moderator, when he was here, expressed concern that town meeting was growing and he wouldn't be able to handle it as town meeting members get to be more and more numerous. So there is a way to check that and address it. But let's have a discussion for numbers of town meeting members. Larry?
Maybe at our first meeting, or second, Mr. Withington spoke to us and said, we had to decide what, I think he was talking about something, what the goal was before we could decide how to reach it. And I think that's true with the number of town meeting representatives. There is a confusion, I think, between the historical position of town meeting, which was, excuse me, ladies, but it was a bunch of wise men getting together and filtering some ideas and coming up with solutions. As the town grew, we said, okay, it was a much larger group. It wasn't just landowners. It was going to be anyone who was a voter in town was eligible. And thank goodness we doubled the possible number by adding women to that group. And then we came up with representatives. But it was still the idea of a representative group from Plymouth filtering ideas, and it was the wisdom of the group that was what we were gaining. There is another view of town meeting, and that is that it's Congress on a lower level, and that each person that has to be accountable to the members, and it's not entirely clear whether a Precinct 12 town meeting representative is supposed to be dealing with just Precinct 12's viewpoint, or whether he's supposed to have the interests of the town. My feeling is, I like the historical view of the town, that there is some wisdom in the town, and it is the job of town meeting to filter it. Under those circumstances, the idea of cutting the number of town meeting members, I think, is wrong. I think that Plymouth already is at the very low end of representation. Each town meeting representative represents a larger group of people than virtually any other town in the Commonwealth. I am not sure that 9 is the perfect number, but I wouldn't want to go and go down from 9. There's nothing magic about 135 town meeting members if we're talking about the wisdom of the group. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. More comments? Just a note of historical perspective. This was actually thoroughly debated a few years ago. I think it's probably maybe 7 or 8 years ago. A charter review committee brought in a substantial cut to the number of town meeting members and presented it to town meeting for debate and action. And several people disagreed with cutting the size of town meeting at that point. Then I remember we did a PowerPoint presentation that did show all the other town meetings in the state. And interestingly, out of many, actually dozens of town meetings, Plymouth was the second smallest when that year, when that debate was taking place. There was only one town meeting, I think it was Saugus, that was smaller than Plymouth. Many of the town meetings that we've been looking at, you know, Brookline, 240, Darlington's, I think, 239. I mean, they're all in the lower mid-200s. So Plymouth's 135 is a very small town meeting. I would think, though, we might want to put in a provision, if we were going down that road, that limited the size, like some towns have done, just mathematically, by establishing a fixed number, and then as the precincts grow, the number of town meeting members per precinct would actually be reduced. Other comments? Betsy?
I just wanted to report on Dartmouth, because that's a town I grew up in. I grew up in Dartmouth, and my family still lives there, and they seem to be doing okay. They have 390 members elected from 8 precincts, and the 390 is permanent, so they adjust how many people from each precinct.
How many was that, Betsy?
They have 390
390?
for 34,000 people. That's a 210.
Which
My
town
mom
is
was
that?
my mother was a town meeting member. I don't ever remember her complaining that there were too many town meeting
Dartmouth,
members.
right.
So they have 390, only 34,000 people. So I think that the number of people in the town doesn't affect how many people could be on town meeting or how well town meeting operates. One of the things that I'm seeing is that now with the electronic voting and so forth, it certainly goes a lot faster. I think counting 390 votes in the year 1990 might have been more difficult than now, when it's almost instant, no matter how many people are voting. One of the big concerns for how many people are in town meeting is having people have an opportunity to speak. But and I think that's something we should discuss.
I think we talked about inviting in the Mark Sylvia, who's involved in the government there in Dartmouth.
He's Fairhaven.
Huh?
He's in
Fairhaven.
Fairhaven, yeah.
I did have a
So-
chance to speak to him briefly. He does plan to attend. He's
Oh,
looking
that's
for a
good,
date
yeah.
from us.
So I think it's worth, even though it's been looked at by former charter commissions, it's worth, revisiting. And I don't know if there's any sort of like proof that a small town meeting is better than a big town meeting. I don't know how you would calculate that.
Okay. Wrestling.
Yeah, it's, my concern is in the last, even before the pandemic, we've had a bunch of precincts that have had a hard time getting enough people interested in becoming town meeting members. And it was before the pandemic that we had these problems. And it's interesting, if you look at the numbers of people who are running, there's rarely, a runoff. There's just enough people to run. And also, I think it's tough when you ask town meeting whether they want to cut their members or not. I think that's a rough thing to do. I just think that we really need to look at town meeting, that historically, yeah, it's nice to look at, but I think we need to be in today's age where there's a lack of interest that I've been seeing. And it's when we've got 10% of the people voting, that you take a percentage of that percentage of that are really running for town meeting, it's really, tough to find good town meeting members. And I think that's something that we should factor in. I personally think it's gotten too big. I think that, if you look at, I think it's precinct 8 has never had enough people running. And it's sad to see, but I think that we really need to look at that as in our factoring that, there's a lack of interest of people running for town meeting.
Right, David?
Well, my vote is for either 5 or 6 per precinct. And I'm disagreeing with my distinguished colleague to my left here. If we stay at 135 plus or minus, that evolves into 7.94. So 8 members per precinct would be 136, 8 times 17. 9 times 17 is 153. I think we can accomplish the same thing with 5 or 6 town meeting members per precinct. 5 times 17 is 85. 6 times 17 is 112? 102. 17, we do 17 times 6, 102. So I think we can effectively cut it down and still not lose efficiency. And I think I agree with wrestling on this point. I think if you have less openings, you might be able to fill them easier. I'm thinking 5 to 6, and I'm pretty steadfast in that.
Bill, go ahead.
So, wrestling your points to the frustration that one might experience in a precinct to find an interest level. I'd have to say that at different times, you're correct. There has been interest levels that haven't been elevated to the level they should be. And I think that has a lot to do with one of these things that I've been involved in enough campaigns in Plymouth to know that getting that information out to the residents, a lot of residents don't know. They don't know what form of government they have, and they don't vote, and they don't participate. And could we be doing something as a town to let the residents know when there's elections, how to, these things that you need to be doing. And I know that in efforts in the past, we've tried to look at precincts where they're struggling to find members and doing what we can to reach out to people in that part of town to educate them about the opportunity. So I think that a level of outreach about election cycles, how one can serve, what kind of government you have, it's one of these things I've always said about Plymouth. It's like, it's like the best kept secret. Elections, form of government, how you can participate, the committees and boards you can be on. That being said, in the period in time in which I got involved, I would say I first ran for town meeting like 1998. It's been over 22 years now. I have seen in some places where you'd never think that there would be someone running for town meeting. Some town meeting members, they have to do a mailing. They got to put up lawn signs. They got to go door to door. So I have seen things over a period of time that has shown that some precincts and some town meeting races get pretty competitive, much more competitive than they were 20 years ago. But you are right, there is a lack of excuse me? Yeah, and one that was because they were moving out of town. And it wasn't like they became disinterested in the responsibility. Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
Presley, you don't know where the precinct's necessarily going to be, where there's active participation, really competitive. Every time I've run for, I don't know how many decades, we've had vigorous races where we've always had to produce a letter and try to get the letter in the hands of every homeowner. And I remember going door to door, delivering flyers as long ago as in the late 70s. And it was very competitive. And I think even today, there are precincts in Plymouth that are still really very competitive. So I think it depends if you can gin up the interest in a particular precinct. Certainly there are precincts that are on the front line of development. They're going to be where people are more interested.
We just have to do a better job.
Eyes on projects.
We just have to do a better job as a town of getting the word out of how this process works, how people can participate in it. I know the town clerk is very interested in this subject matter, and she is starting to assemble a working group, to think of ways of how do we increase voter turnout? How do we increase community participation on committees and boards in whatever form of government we end up with? So I know that the current clerk has been talking about doing something that hasn't been done. Maybe Larry can speak to this, but I hadn't seen it done for some time
Well,
about
and that's-
outreach.
That is something that precinct chairs have been trying to deal with. I know my caucus has been, how do we get voter turnout? But it's not only that people don't know. There's a lot of apathy of people who don't care. And getting those signatures to form this group, a lot of people, well, I don't care. I'll just sign that. I don't care. And that's something we also have to deal with is that there's a lot of apathy. They don't care. It's encouraging to see people paying attention to the planning board, people coming to this meeting. It's anytime there's public coming and being involved, I'm very encouraged. I was so happy to see the involvement in the planning board on the decision on Bump Rock Road that, they started paying attention. And that's, I hope that's a trend. But, there's a lot of apathy as well as a lot of, not knowing.
But I think wrestling, you put your finger on it, I think people, and the research shows this, because this has been brought up a few times at these meetings, when people get really interested and active, it's when they're not happy what's going on. Then they turn out like at Bump Rock, and they're there. But when things are going well, they tend to be thinking about other things. So you don't get so it's not necessarily a symbol of things going bad that there's low turnout. Bill? Scott?
I want to add a comment to that, and, it's not too many times that I'm probably the hardest to the right on something with this board, but, I've said all along, I'm for 2 to 3 town meeting members. Make it a competitive race, make it, if you take it down to that many, and you make it into a competitive race, it's going to draw out the people that care. The people like Billy here, who should have a parking space out front of this building, because he's here every night. But that's who you want to be town meeting members. If we're going to keep town meeting, you need to pare it way down, down to 2, maybe 3. I'm a bigger fan of 2. Like I said, it's kind of odd that I'm the farthest to the right on this, but that would encourage a competitive race. And we've beat to death this concept of we need to get voter turnout. And we do. But it's, at a point of the idealism of it, you have to deal with the realities that are in front of you, which is how do we make the best out of what we have for voter turnout? My opinion all along has been move it to a November. A November election draws turnout. Even in an off year, it's a November election. Everybody's used to that cycle. Yeah, well, they can't do it under a town meeting form of government. If we go to, a bad word city form of government, then we can move our elections to November. That's why I'm a fan of that. But to do the most with what we have, you can, to make it a competitive race, to get the people that care, to get the people that are going to put the work in an uncompensated position. If you par that down to 2 or 3 people per precinct, then you're going to make it into a competitive race. You're going to draw the people out, people much like ourselves, that are here on a Monday night in an uncompensated position, trying to do the people's business. And that's, kind of there comes a point where, we keep our idealism, and we use that in our charge. But like I said, if we can't pin everything on a future better voter turnout, at least without moving the elections to November.
Larry?
I think we need to make a decision on the number of town meeting representatives per precinct, separate from the concept of increasing turnout by having competition. Today, Secretary Galvin spoke and said that he expected, he didn't use the word awful, but this is the best translation, a terrible turnout in Boston, where there is a competitive race. It is November, and this is a mayor. And the problem is not the form of government. The problem is that for whatever reason, municipal government does not bring out the number of voters. As town clerk, I can tell you, it was easy to predict. Presidential elections, gubernatorial elections, town elections. It simply went that way. There could be adjustments in each of them, but I don't think there was a single period in which there was not that hierarchy. I think that we are going to have to understand that we have separation between numbers and competition.
Frank Mann?
I think a lot of what I was going to say has been said, except for I do feel that the numbers may be approximately correct now, because I just think that you have to have a broad representation. I think 2 or 3 people, essentially that would be at maximum 50 people representing all the interests of the community. It could easily be a biased group. I mean, right now it's difficult enough to get younger people in, and the more younger people, the more spread the demographics are, I think the better the results overall. I do believe in that process, but I agree with Mr. Pizer that we should make this decision separate from whether or not this is a result or we need to do things to increase the overall enthusiasm. That's something we can't truly control. It's more of a systemic thing nationally, I think, whether you're apathetic or positive or in general. We have to work locally about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Bill?
I would have to, I'm not saying that outreach is going to solve the problem of voter turnout, because Larry is absolutely right. If anybody's worked on a campaign over a period of time, we know the presidential, the gubernatorial, these races, the midterms get a lot of attention. But at the same time, we can look at examples where in the city of Boston right now, there is a very competitive race, and Larry pointed it out effectively, where there are issues. The thing that I say, if we are looking, as we look at different forms of government, I think one of the strengths of the town meeting form of government is the town meeting, is that you have a body that people can decide to serve on without great investment in terms of the financial cost that incurs to run for office. This is what's deterring people from serving, is the amount of money you have to spend to hold a seat. In town meeting, there's not a great cost. There's maybe some knocking on doors, you make a few lawn signs, you might do a few mailings to the neighbors, but the cost that's invested in the system is limited. That gives the average person the type of representation that Frank is looking for. We want to see a diversity at town meeting, young, old, different demographics serving in this capacity. When you have an electoral process that's designed around that, I'm going to get people serving in a capacity that they're not so vested in the system that they're politically distracted by their ambition. That once you get down to a small group of people, they're thinking about, where am I going from here? What, I'm going to be the mayor, I'm going to be council, I'm going to be something else. The thing that I've noticed about town meeting, when given a very difficult question, as John outlined, budget tough questions that the selectmen gave us over the years to make decisions, when we have a really tough decision, I see town meeting erring on the caution of what's best for the town of Plymouth, because they're free of this political ambition. They back up, and I've seen town meeting do this numerous times, and this is one of the strengths of town meeting, is that they're an uncorruptible body, and they will err on the side of what is best for the town of Plymouth and not for the individual elected official. Sometimes we see people in elected capacity, because of the great cost it incurs to have that job, think about the ramifications of having that profiles and courage moment of doing the right thing and not worrying about the political reprisal. So there's something nice about the fact that how you become a town meeting member and how you serve. I don't want to shrink it down to a body that is influential. You know, you could influence it in a negative way. I think that as we consider whatever form of government we consider, that we consider town meeting and focus on some of its better attributes.
Betsy?
Two things. One, it might be interesting if we could each, and that may not be possible, but I will pick one myself, pick a town to go to their town meeting, as long as it's not the same night as our town meeting. So, for example, Dartmouth with 360, and I don't remember how many in Fairhaven. Winchester has 192 town meeting members for 21,000 people. Be interesting if we could find enough close by that we could go and actually attend their town meeting and see how it goes. We're talking about something we've not seen. You know, we've never seen Dartmouth in activity. You know, what is a town meeting like that has 390 people? I lived in a town that had open town meeting, by the way, and nobody cared who was apathetic. Whoever showed up at town meeting is who voted. And they are the ones who got to decide what happened in town. And they didn't say, well, why isn't Mary here? They said, hey, Mary's not interested. I am. I'll help make this decision, and they voted. And there's still plenty of open town meeting towns in Massachusetts where whoever shows up makes the decisions. And I think that's true with the precincts here in Plymouth. If a precinct isn't active enough and if the other town meeting members can't go, I mean, I know in my precinct, when we had an opening, we went a bunch of us, and talked to a bunch of different people and said, here's what town meeting is. And we have not had, since I became town meeting member, we've never had a time when we didn't have a full complement of members. Because we go out and look for members as town meeting members. So I don't see that changing necessarily in my precinct. So one thing I think would be really fun and interesting would be to go to these other town meetings and see what they're like, but also, I do believe that we want representation, and we shouldn't decide in this charter on what's happening in Precinct 8 in Plymouth in 2021. We should be looking at a long-term idea. So right now, maybe some precinct is having trouble, somebody resigned, and that's going to be difficult, but I don't think that's how we should plan our future town meeting numbers. It shouldn't be what's happening in 2021 today.
Thank you. It being 8:30, yes, returning to public comment, it being 8:30. Okay, so introduce us to people that want to speak, public comment. It will be limited to 7 minutes, but who would like to speak? Did you say you have somebody on Zoom?
I have Betty Cabaco.
Okay, that's fine. Go ahead. Sure. Oh. So, Michelle, why don't you have her then stand by and we'll listen to somebody here in the audience that might want to speak? Anybody here wish to speak in public comment? Yes, sir.
Is this on? Good evening. My name is Richard Caproni. I'm a resident of Precinct 15. I live in the Pine Hills, and I'm proud of it. Thank you for allowing me to testify before this commission. First of all, I want to review a community-wide mailing sent by an organization calling itself Citizens for a Better Plymouth, seeking votes to become members of this commission. Okay, you're a member of this group, aren't you, Larry? You're not. Bill Cohane, you're a member of the Citizens for a Better Plymouth?
You go ahead and just deliver, if you give us your comments and your thoughts, that's what we like to hear.
Well, I know, but I try to sneak a question in there. Okay. Ironically, someone gave me the wrong answer. 6 of the 10 candidates on this mailer, which is very, very expensive. Wrestling, you didn't have a mailer because you probably couldn't afford it. Scott Vecchi could probably afford it, but he decided not to have a mailer. 6 of the 10 candidates on this mailer were elected. It even boggles my mind that there were 10 candidates, but there were only 9 open positions. So somebody was going to have to lose, even if all 10 got elected. 3 other candidates were elected: Scott and David Peck and Wrestling, without the financial resources of this citizens group. Okay. This mailing promises in black and white, all right, to improve our current form of government by modernizing it for the 21st century. Meanwhile, as I attend these meetings and I watch them on PAC TV, I hear very little about modernizing the government of the town of Plymouth. So what this group said they would do on their mailer, I don't see them doing. Maybe they're holding it back. We do have a year and a half to go, but you're not doing what you promised to do. And what I see you doing is continually advocating for the status quo town meeting form of government. And then people come up and testify, and you're rude and dismissive to the people who testify about different forms of government. And you're also not welcoming to the people who want to have a choice. All right, we've spoken in recent meetings about give the people a choice, okay? And I hope to assure you that that is going to happen in May of 2023, despite what the people sitting here are doing. As an aside, the Commonwealth recommends that any town that reaches a population of $35,000 to $40,000 for 35 to 40,000 citizens should consider changing to a city form of government, which comes in 4 different flavors. I'm not going to make a speech on the 4 different flavors, but the one that has been brought to the table here by Commissioner Peck, all right, is the city council form of government, which very much looks like a hybrid of town meeting and a more traditional city form of government. As these meetings continue, it's painfully obvious that these 6 commissioners were opposed to any significant changes in the town's charter. That's what I hear, okay? And whoever else is listening, I imagine they're hearing the same thing. They want the current, outdated, inefficient, unproductive, rubber stamp behavior of our town meeting members. Just this past few weeks, the Plymouth Town meeting members rejected an article to implement additional housing options in order to keep homeownership more affordable and just. Comments like, I don't want these people to live next door to me, and we don't have enough water and sewer to accommodate these people. All right. This is a wonderful idea to support the senior citizens of Plymouth who have limited financial resources, okay? And the people who must have the status quo are trying to shoot it down in flames, okay? It's a brilliant idea to expand Plymouth's affordable and usable housing stock. I find this behavior nothing short of embarrassing. Many of Plymouth citizens think it's time to dispense with the old guard and bring forth new town leadership to guide our community forward, make it prosperous and successful. As I stood out in the fickle New England weather to ask voters to sign the petition to form a charter commission, and over 7,000 people signed that petition, okay? Many more than the 2,000 or 2,100 or 2,200 people who voted for the commissioners themselves. These vote counts, 2,000 votes. It's not a mandate.
Excuse me, you're over the 7 minutes, can we,
Okay, I have 2 more paragraphs.
Okay.
After a few months, it's painful that change is not welcome by this commission. And the hard work required to write the town charter was verbally expressed by some charter members. And I would say to you, it's too much work. You shouldn't be on the commission if it's too much work. You should resign. Plymouth must change to a more inclusive and representative form of government that is quicker to respond to the challenges of municipal government in a new century and a new decade in a new century, a post-pandemic society. If this does not happen, the town will atrophy into an irrelevant, underperforming community. Our children will go off to college and never return due to the lack of opportunities for good jobs and abundant family life. Their future is in your hands. You can stop the progress by maintaining the current charter, but you should not do that. And as Coach Belichick says, gentlemen, do your job.
thank you. Is there any other public comment? Yes.
My name's Peter Neville. I'm a town meeting rep from Precinct 10, soon to be, I think, jettisoned over to Precinct 5. Who knows? Anyway, what a pleasure it is to be here tonight and to personally thank you for your engagement in this civic process. I know how hard it was for me to get here at 7 p.m. And most of the people I see here, I know from prior civic commitments. And that's very meaningful. You come to this engagement with a history and with a knowledge, much more than mine. I've been a town meeting member for several years, and I am guilty of, drinking from the fire hose. I sat on A&F for 6 months, and the moderator said that he needed to have someone that he could trust, so he didn't renew my appointment. Sort of odd. I asked him what the standard of review was, but we won't go into that. I'm really here to say thank you for your commitment, and I really think that some of your questions tonight spoke to the seriousness and the objectivity that you're approaching this task with, and I commend you for it. For instance, how can we be more forward-thinking is a great question. I thought your question about, and you get into the weeds a little bit, about the role of administration and finance as a very important, how can we do this better? And you were asking a former member of that committee, you have a former chairperson, Mr. Malaguti, a member of that committee. I was a member of that committee. I think Harry Salerno would be a great person to ask that question of. He was the former chair of the Finance Committee. He's a partner and owner of a very successful accounting firm. He understands what the word audit means. And he came to mind as someone that might have a view as to the strengths and weaknesses of a Finance Committee in its correlation with the Select Board. I thought your question about what about the master plan? And somehow I may have missed it, but I thought, well, I'm a town meeting member. I don't know what the master plan is. I don't have one on my bookcase shelf. I don't act and vote according to what the master plan is, and maybe I should. But that goes back to my last time here when I said I thought there should be a standard of review for town meeting members, and when you get to that, you know. What are the qualifications? Can you read a financial statement? Would that be helpful? Do you understand what collective bargaining is? Do you know what the word free cash is? Do you know what that means? And I think that the Massachusetts Municipal Association has the wherewithal to provide a curriculum that would provide this town with a standard of review. Civic engagement has come up as an issue. How do we get people more involved? I recently raised that question at a supper table, and someone said to me, "You need to read the book Bowling Alone." Highly recommended. My last point, I guess, is redundancy in leadership. Our town clerk left. Was there redundancy in leadership? The town manager is going to leave. Is there redundancy in leadership? What am I talking about? Has anybody ever been a member of Rotary here? You have the president, you have the past president, you have the president-elect. There is a network of tradition, practice, intelligence in that structure. It's a redundancy in leadership. Collective bargaining, when you get to it, I would strongly encourage the commission to consider having one person represent the 13 different collective bargaining positions. Because it is, I mean, one comes in and looks for parity. Say the first one, there is no parity, right? But the second one that comes in looks for parity because the first one's already got a deal. And you go right down the line for 13. What a waste of time. Talk about, dog licenses. Why don't we have one person sit down with the union and say, what do you want? And bring that. This is what we want. One person. Redundancy in leadership, collective bargaining. That's it. I sincerely thank you. I'll be back, sorry, but I probably will be back. I found this very, very, very educational. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Michelle, do we have somebody on Zoom? Betty Cabaco?
Hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
No. Louder, please.
Okay, hold on. Can you hear me now?
That's better. Yes, thank you.
Let me turn this up a little bit more. Good evening. I know that everyone is aware, or Mr. Abbott, I know you responded to me about the letter I sent in regarding having some of our high school students join in the Charter Commission. I wanted to just say that we're waiting to put a plan together with Mr. Powers of the, he does all the civics learning at the school. But I'd also like to comment on a couple of things that I heard, and maybe you'll like to address it or maybe not. But one of the things that we talk about is civic engagement. And although I've heard from many people that civic engagement is problematic, because when we go to these boards and committees and everything like that, we end up appointing some of the same people. Some of the same people are on all of our committees. Some people believe that getting involved isn't going to make a difference. So I think that's one of the things that we need to change. I know myself, I will always look for the new person coming in because I want that new person to become involved. One of the things that I found very interesting is that I still, as a selectman, I still haven't heard from the Charter Commission as to wanting our input and the goals that we've put forward and what we want to see for the town. So I'm kind of waiting for the Charter Commission to come to the selectmen, and if it's something that you want me to set up a meeting to do that, I will do that. And no one has asked us our opinion, and you do have, you know, an ex-selectman, and you have another selectman that was on the board several years ago, but this is an entirely different board. We're very proactive, we're getting a lot done, and I think going back into the archives for the position that we serve now is an injustice to what, you know, we're trying to accomplish. And I'm even more concerned about the comments that Mr. Malaguti made, that we're involved, we're more involved in day-to-day business than we should be, or the charter allows. And I'd like for him to give me examples of that, because I believe our selectmen are just, you know, sending along messages that we're getting from the people that elected us to address their issues to a department head or the town manager, and addressing that with all those people is a more efficient way. So, you know, Mr. Malaguti claimed that we're not doing what we should be doing. I'd like to know exactly what that might be, so I can certainly address that as well.
Just, David?
If you read your charter, your delegation of powers is specifically spelled out, and that's how we always ran it when I was on the board, and I see no reason to deviate from it at this point.
No, I would just like to say that at the very outset of our commission meetings, we asked staff to invite all of the current major office holders in town to meet with the commission here and give us their ideas on how to improve our local government. In fact, I extended that very specific invitation to you, Betty, when you joined our meeting by Zoom a couple of months ago. I asked you if you would give us your ideas on how to improve the functioning of the select board. And so we have an open invitation to come and discuss that with us, and as does every other selectman currently serving on the select board. We would love to hear from the select board. This is why our entertaining Mr. Mahoney here tonight was so valuable, because he was a former selectman. So if you can make it down here to the commission so that we can see you and discuss your thoughts of how to improve our local form of government, we'd love to hear it. And Michelle, I'll ask you again just to extend that invitation again. Because whenever folks accept our invitation, we immediately put them on the schedule, and we look forward to their comments.
I believe we should have a joint meeting. And that's just my opinion, a joint meeting with the Charter Commission and the Select Board. And like I said, I can give you a million different reasons what works and what doesn't work. Well, maybe not a million, but several. We're a big town. We have a big budget. It's very difficult to not be able to do business on a weekly basis or an emergent basis. I don't really care about the form of government that's chosen. My most important thing is that the people have a choice of which form of government they want, and not just the commission, but the residents in general. And as far as Mr. Malaguti's comment is that's the way they always did it, that may be the way they always did it, but that doesn't work. Our residents want action. And if they have an issue, they bring it to us, we bring it to town management, and they want it addressed. So I appreciate the way they did business before, but the way they did business before no longer works in a town of 62,000 people.
Well, it worked for 22 years. I don't see why it isn't continuing to work. And this constant communication with department heads, all communication should go through the town manager. That's what the charter says, that's what we did, and that's what should be done now.
And who's saying it isn't?
We're not going to debate you on this point now.
That's because your point is
Any other
incorrect.
comment from the commission? Betsy?
Yes, Betty, have you read the book Bowling Alone? That Mr.
Bowling
Neville
Alone?
mentioned, Bowling Alone? It's
I
about
have
the
not.
collapse and revival of the American community. I'm glad that Mr. Neville pointed this out. I just sent a copy of the book website and information about it to the rest of the commission. It looks like a fascinating book. It says that it's based on 500,000 interviews showing how community engagement has declined across the United States. You know, it's not a Plymouth problem, as we all know. And it also gives ideas about how to re-engage civically. And it also tells the reasons why people are less engaged. So I think that that might be a book that, you know, all of us as commissioners could look at as we discuss through our charter, how can we re-engage people. But Betty, I do have a question for you. In terms of this discussion between you and Mr. Malaguti, the charter now says that the select board is involved with policy and that they don't get involved in talking to department heads and that kind of thing, as I understand it anyway. Are you suggesting that the charter be changed so that the select board have more of a management role in the town?
Well, I mean, changed to a certain degree because despite what Mr. Malaguti is saying, if a resident contacts the Board of Selectmen, that Board of Selectmen, including myself, will send that to the town manager and whatever department head the issue that this resident feels, you know, is applicable. So to say that we are only dealing directly with department heads is incorrect. Everything that I know I have sent through has gone to the town manager along with the department head, along with the rest of the Board of Selectmen. So yes, I do think there should be language put in there that, you know, people don't reach out to department heads. People reach out to the elected officials that they believe they elected to represent them. And that is why maybe there is more involvement with the elected officials and the town manager and department heads, or however you want to put it. But there is a chain that we follow. People aren't just throwing things at department heads. They're not assigning work to department heads. They're not doing any of that, despite what some may feel. So what it is that a resident gets in touch with us, and as you all know, I have several residents that get in touch with me. I take their concern, I send it to the town manager, I CC the department head and the rest of the selectmen that goes along with it. That's my job. I feel that's the way I represent the people that elected me, and I feel the rest of the board does the same thing. So to say that we only set policy, so what would someone like yourself, even you, Betsy, do if you were a selectman, somebody sent you an issue, and what do? Sorry, I set policy, I can't address that? Is that how we're looking at this? Because that certainly isn't what the residents believe that we should be doing.
So I'd like to, public comment has ended. Thank you very much for your comment. I just want to say on behalf of the commission that we are a creature of the state statute. This commission was elected in accordance with Chapter 43B. We've been following every paragraph, every section of that statute. We are responsible only to the citizens of Plymouth. If members of the Board of Selectmen have input, we'd love to hear it. So please come here and speak to us. The commission is going to continue to meet live here in the Great Hall and also on Zoom. But we are doing the job that we were elected to do in accordance with the state statute that governs the formation and functioning of charter commissions. It's a very specific statute. As we said at the very beginning of this exercise, we would listen for 2 to 3 months, and then we would begin to formulate ideas. We would study other charters, and we would listen to people from other towns and that have things they can tell us how they're operating to see if we think they would work in Plymouth. That's our function. So we'll continue to listen. We will have public comment at every meeting for anybody that wants to speak. The night that select persons come to this meeting, we'd love to hear what you have to say about the select board. That's just part of our job. We want to get to the finance committee. That was on our agenda for tonight. It'll be on the agenda for our next meeting. We're going to go over the finance committee in detail because we have a lot of thoughts on how we can improve it. Our total function here is to make Plymouth's government work better, more efficient, and that's what we said at the outset. That's what we intend to do. Is there any other comment on the members of the commission? It being 9 o'clock, yes, Betsy.
I'm sorry, I just have one comment. But my understanding of the charter was that it's the responsibility of the selectmen, or the select board, to implement the charter, that their responsibility is to follow the charter that we have now. And maybe there'll be a change at
Yes,
some
of
point,
course.
but that would be the select board's
Right.
role. So thank you.
Everybody in town has to should follow the charter. That was one of the items on the agenda. We're going to discuss it next week, is how to deal with provisions in the charter that are not being followed. But yes, the charter is there. It's what governs the functioning of our municipal government. Larry?
Bill, I did miss last week's meeting.
Yes,
It
right.
would be okay if I made a
Yes.
couple of comments. I did watch the entire meeting on PAC TV. Thank PAC TV for having such opportunities. On redistricting, I think that it will, if we were to put something into the charter on redistricting, it would be a huge challenge. The process this year was interrupted by the state House of Representatives within the general court imposing their districts on ours, which required tomorrow an adjustment to the map that was produced. So the problem with issuing a statement of how redistricting should go, there needs to be, I think Frank's word was nimbleness. We need to be careful on that. I also would say that the select board, who is the ones responsible at this point for redistricting, with whatever fits and starts they came, it's their job to say how the process is going to go, ended up with a process that was quite open to members of the community. There was a question of filling vacancies on the select board. I have one statement which is both easy and hard. State law says the select board is special. It's different from any of the other boards in town, and therefore the method of filling the position on even planning board, school committee, is different from the legal requirements for the select board. I understand it's quite an imposition on both the rather small town clerk's office and on the not big enough budget of the town of Plymouth to have an extra election. However, the question is, what do we think of the importance of the select board in following the present practice of state law? We need to find the balance when we make that decision. And term limits. I think with some of the select board members here, it works. I voted for you, Dave. Yeah. But, well, even the long-standing chair of the select board did not win all of his elections, so incumbency is not a guarantee of victory, and I'm not sure that term limits is something that would be required. And finally, there was a discussion about the fact that the and we should probably get the term right, Advisory and Finance Committee, because that is its actual title. That board frequently votes unanimously or close to unanimously, and the question is that a rubber stamp? Having been there, having appeared before the Advisory and Finance Committee, I will tell you that I knew better than to come with a half-baked idea before that board. It was a well-prepared document on my part when I appeared, and my colleagues, the other department and division heads who appeared before the Finance Committee, did no differently. And therefore, it was not surprising that I don't think there was ever a negative vote on anything I presented to the Finance Committee. Because I didn't present anything to the Finance Committee that was frivolous or fringe. That isn't how it works. So we can have quibbles, but I'm not sure that that's one that I would accept. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Larry. The next item is new business and old business. Either one? Okay, hearing none, the next meeting is... The minutes I don't think are prepared, right? No. Next week. Next meeting is 2 weeks from tonight, which is November 15th. Is there any other comment? Then the motion is in order.
Motion to adjourn.
We are adjourned.